Rule Book. We just saw there briefly on screens that we're looking back now at another home crowd hero. When we say home Grand Prix for the VR46 Academy boys, Andrea Bastianini, we really are not exaggerating. Andrea, born and bred just down the road in nearby Rimini. Of course, the fabled VR46 ranch in Tavuglia is about a 5-minute drive into the hillsides, close by this Misano World Circuit. Marco Simoncelli, we're looking at Luca Marini, who was in the pre-event press conference yesterday, sounding pretty bullish about his prospects. All of a sudden, we're seeing Hondas in the hands of Zarco, Marini and Mia start to pose regular threats, aren't we, for the top 6. Luca Marini got a bit greedy, I think, last time out in Barcelona. They've got up into 5th place after a great fight with Quartararo and Zarco in that battle of who could manage the tyre best in that tyre-punishing Catalan Grand Prix. He saw Pedro Acosta coming back to him, fading fast on the soft rear tyre on the KTM. And that's when he got greedy. He thought, you know what, I can get a 4th here. My best ever Honda result, and in doing so, just overused his own medium rear tyre and eventually slipped back to 8th. But he said yesterday, Lewis, when I spoke to him in the pre-event press conference, he feels that if they can qualify inside the top 10, without any question, he can be in that battle once again for the top 6. And he spoke also about this continual progress that Honda have been making behind the scenes. They're not big steps, but every time they seem to bring a new part, they're improving on RC213V. And Luca said yesterday, if we carry on at this rate of development, at this rate of progress, it is not beyond the realms of possibility to think we can seriously start thinking about fighting the podiums in 2026, which is great news. And of course, from a Honda point of view, they have had podiums this season, but they came in some slightly unusual circumstances earlier in the season. John Zarco's victory at Le Mans, and it was a weird Grand Prix in some respects, the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. So on pure pace, this would be a major milestone for Honda if they can achieve that. But there's been an awful lot of speculation, an awful lot of reporting done around Andrea Bastianini since we last saw him standing on the podium, of course, in the Catalan Grand Prix, and it's not really regarding a negative what's going on within his pit box, looking at an update on what's going on. Yeah, and can confirm that those reports are true, that Alberto Giudicola not in Andrea Bastianini's side of the box for this Grand Prix, and it seems like that will be the case for the rest of the year. Strong links with him moving across the Pramac Yamaha next year to be top track Raz Gatlioglu's first ever MotoGP crew chief. So in comes Xavi Palatin, a name that might not be too familiar to everybody at home, but he's got a long history in the paddock, primarily within the Moto3 World Championship. He was actually crew chief to Alex Marquez when he won the Moto3 crown a number of years ago. More recently, he's been heading up the Moto3 project for KTM before when Aki Ajo stepped in at the helm of KTM. He had a long-standing relationship with him and asked him to move across to the MotoGP effort. He's been almost a technical coordinator down at the Tech Flag Garage, working alongside Sebastian Rita, who we know is the technical director at KTM. So he was the perfect fit for Albi stepping away and moving across to Yamaha. It seems like at the end of the year they decided to part ways early before the end of the season and instead Xavi for the remainder of the season. So that was a relationship that would never break. The pair of them had such a bond ever since the mayor stepped into the World Championship with Gresini Ducati. They had and then, of course, they were able to come back together and separating during the main season in the factory Ducati squad. So I think a huge surprise for everybody that that relationship has ended up in divorce halfway through the season. Yeah, thanks very much, Jack. Yeah, Andrea Bastianini in the pre-event press conference yesterday asked him about that split with Giuriola, and he confirmed it. It actually happened throughout the Barcelona weekend, which obviously didn't disturb him too much after he took his first ever KTM Grand Prix podium. At least publicly yesterday, Andrea was being quite diplomatic about the whole situation. Behind the scenes privately, I've been speaking to a couple of people at Tech 3, and they say he's absolutely seething. He's not happy at all that once again he's splitting with Giuriola, who I think was a big part of the reason why Andrea joined KTM. He knew it was a chance to reunite with his trusted crew chief, and it's quite unusual, isn't it? To, as Jack mentioned, to have rider stroke crew chief have sort of a split at this stage of the season. The knock-on effect, of course, is quite significant, Lewis. I've got to say, I'm a little bit surprised as well by the fact that Toprak Razgatlioglu, who's coming over from World Superbikes next year. We're all led to believe he'd be bringing over his very trusted crew chief, who knows him exceptionally well, and Phil Marron, who's been with him at Yamaha and at BMW. That looked like a shoo-in for Marron to make the move over. A familiar face, somebody that Toprak could trust, and they knew each other inside out, but this Giro Viola news has really thrown a spanner in the works, and starting on a new bike, a new team, a new paddock, new tyres, you name it, and then a new crew chief. It's going to be tough work for Toprak. Yeah, well, he's already a tough ass. We move across from the World Superbike Championship to MotoGP, as uber talented as he is. You know, we might have had Ryder's silly season come to an end a little earlier than perhaps he did last year, but crew chief's silly season seems to have sprung into life as we move into September, and because it's the first person you speak to when you come off the bike, it's the last person you speak to before you jump back on it. It's a real team effort, it's a real partnership, it's almost a MotoGP marriage in many respects, rider and crew chief. So yeah, Enea Bastianini having to get used to working with someone new, but Marc Marquez, who we're now looking at, will say that it's not all necessarily a disaster. Gets to change your crew chief. This is, of course, Marc Marquez's third crew chief that he's had to work with in his MotoGP career. Spent so long with Santi Hernandez, a partnership much like Marc Marquez and Honda that we thought would never end. Of course, then worked with Frankie Carcetti in his Gresini stint at Ducati, of course, now such a successful combination with Marco Rigamonti at the factory Ducati squad. So, Toprak Razgatlioglu and Enea Bastianini would appear in the next year or so, going to be having to form a new relationship, but it's certainly not necessarily the end of their MotoGP hopes. We have seen mileage recover from that before. The Italians loving life at the moment in Italy's Motorsport Valley here in Misano. We've got an Italian 1, 2, 3 in the very early part of this FP1 session. Marco Bezzecchi is leading the way. Desperate just to turn the page after what was a real bruising Barcelona last time out for Bears, continuing what's been a pretty average run of results at the circuit. The Barcelona Catalunya in the Premier Class. Bezzecchi's found an early 1:31.764. First time in 18 rounds that Bez didn't score a single point, going all the way back to Phillip Island last year. The first time in 30 Grand Prix. The end of the weekend with a double DNF. Of course, he was involved in that tangle very early on with Morbidelli at turn 1 in Barcelona, as we're going to see the reigning world champion on the second of the factory Aprilia, Jorge Martin, get it wrong going into turn 14, but it's a Bez Digia Marini Italian job so far this morning. And we've got another Italian in sixth, and that's the Italian on your screen at the moment, Pecco Bagnaia, who is already stronger at this point than he was at any stage on the Friday in Catalunya a week ago when he was way down at the back of the field. Of course, they've been making all sorts of setup changes to that 63 Ducati over the entire 2025 season, in fairness, to try and bring back that famed front feeling that Pecco Bagnaia has been missing. It kind of feels now as if the major reset needs to be made in Pecco Bagnaia's head, given what we saw. So he's struggling to the extent that he was in Barcelona. Davide Tardozzi, team manager of the Ducati Logo squad, making some pretty forthright comments, it's fair to say, earlier on in the weekend, saying that Pecco Bagnaia's got to help us, help him, and as much as we're trying to make changes to his bike, he's also got to try and ride around some of the problems. Well, this today is a very historic day, it's a monumental day, as you mentioned, in the history of Yamaha Motorsports. It's their first time we've seen their brand new V4 engine out on circuit with test rider Augusto Fernandez. Let's get the thoughts from Monster Energy team manager Mayo Maraglio. Here's the chat. Yeah, absolutely huge day for Yamaha. Mayo, what are your emotions like seeing that V4 out on track for the very first time? Anyway, I think it's an achievement. Considering that we started just a few months ago. To consider whether, let's say, we called it Plan B. And yeah, we're already on track. Luckily, everything has been able to really make steps as we scheduled, and we will also able to anticipate the wildcard, because the wildcard at the end is the best way to really stress the bike in terms of performance in the right way. And this is the first one. we won't have any issue or maybe solve the issue. We will also plan to test in a very hot condition, and in this moment we are really considering white card in Sepang because new project. Unfortunately, even if we say that maybe it's burned in the right way, we didn't have a lot of time on track. And so this is also the reason why we try to put it like that. We try to gather as much as information as possible. We try to be, ready in the way as possible. And for me, another important day will be Monday, where also the factory the second possibility to ride the bike because you know we had positive test last Monday, positive because okay, the weather didn't really assist us, but however we were able to close up the test as we wanted without any issue. Part of the weather condition. But for me, Monday will be even more important because we will be in the middle of the group. Just to confirm the wild card plans for the rest of the year, then we understood maybe we'd see Augusto in Motegi, but is that not the plan now? Just talk us through up until the end of the year when we might see back on track again. No, there is a really high possibility, but it won't be in Motegi, but in Malaysia and most likely in Valencia. It depends how, this weekend will go, but yeah, the plan is really to go to Malaysia where the conditions are extreme. Difficult, because as I said before, the white card is the best way to stress the bike. We had also race in a very hot condition, additional stress, and that's for me, for us, fundamental. Jack yesterday mentioned he would have been more than happy to have the V4 from now until the end of the year, but that can't happen because of the aerodynamics homologations that you've already been through. Was that a slight error to not leave one open to allow Jack to gather a whole bunch of data in these final 6 rounds? Yeah, it's correct. We already homologated all the aerodynamics specification, but also the gearbox. So the reason why we could not do that, but also the resource are not enough. So now we have only these 2 units, and these 2 units need to be used by Augusto to develop the bike. Just finally, Fabio, Alex, Jack on Monday, were they smiling afterwards? They already had a little smile last week, so let's see if next Monday they will. Thank you, Maya. Appreciate your time. Welcome. Thanks very much, as always, Jack, and thanks to Yamaha boss Maya Meregali. You heard it here first, then. Most likely, the 2 remaining wildcard slots for Augusto Fernandez will be possibly supplying in Malaysia. They're desperate to try and get some mileage in hot and humid conditions where that new V4 engine will really be put to stress and test, and also possibly at the final round in Valencia. So I think a lot of us thought maybe it would be another wild card at the next Grand Prix in Japan, but maybe it's not enough time to sort of pour over the data and crunch numbers, as of course we head there in just a couple of weeks' time. It's Fabio Quartararo. It's making some adjustments inside the factory Yamaha garage at the moment. Quartararo 4th fastest and about to venture back out onto circuit. As my American mentioned, Quartararo did make his debut on the new V4 in Catalonia on Monday, and he will be back on the V4 again here at the post-race test here on Monday, where it's normally like Christmas for MotoGP tech fans. So many new parts are set to be unveiled, of course. Really the final chance for all manufacturers to analyse and assess some new parts before that final test in Valencia. I do believe Jan Zarco let slip yesterday. He was testing some kind of early 2026 RC213V prototype at that Barcelona test on Monday. A nice new shiny bike was wheeled down from the latest Biogross pit box aimed to Zarco. He wasn't offering too much detail, but he was also maybe expecting that bike to rock up here as well for the Monday test. So as you'd expect, HRC also continuing to burn the midnight oil. Of course, there in the luxurious position. Both Yamaha and Honda, where they can still continue to test their heart's content as long as they don't use up their allocation of tyres, which is far greater than, for instance, Ducati here. They have the luxury, of course, the concessions mean that Ducati have got no wildcards available to them, whereas Yamaha, of course, can need plenty. Augusto Fernandez still with 2 more of those to go. So 2026 in some respects will almost start on Monday with the first glimpses of what MotoGP may look like in the very near future. And Marc Marquez is already with an eye on 2026 himself. Said yesterday once again in the pre-event press conference and when he spoke to our colleague Elliot York in the broadcaster set that as far as he's concerned, employees, it's the mentality of a world champion. As soon as the 2025 championship is clinched and secured, the next day is essentially the start of his 2026, and he might also get a bit of a head start on next season, given how soon he's going to win the title. Which is just what Mark needs. I mean, 2025 has been so average. He really needs a leg up for 2026, doesn't he? Here he is then through turn 14, and this lap of recovery following the 93 on should be the fastest time of day one so far here in round 16. He's just got the final corner left, the left-hander, which is the Mazzano corner. That's our second gear through there, just over 110 kilometres an hour, and he didn't disappoint us. We were following Mark on the hottest time of day one so far. It's a 1:31.627. Problems here for the V4 now then. Yes, if you're Yamaha, any small sight of an alarm on the dashboard, you are stopping that bike immediately. And an early hiccup for the V4 powered M1 as the inline 4 is in the fence down in the second sector. Miguel Oliveira has gone down. In fact, to the final corner. Yellow's in sector 2 for Augusto Fernandez is stopped Yamaha. The crashed Yamaha of Oliveira has now brought the yellows out in sector 4. Yeah, Oliveira, we just saw Mark go through. We just talked about this. 115 kilometres an hour. The left-hander front giving round to Oliveira before he had any kind of chance to react. Let's hope Miguel's okay because he's had his well-documented injury problems throughout 2025. Because we know that Oliveira has been cast adrift by Yamaha for 2026. If you are a Portuguese fan, if you're a big Miguel Oliveira fan, he does have options, just mulling over them right now. He's been strongly linked for the seat alongside Danilo Petrucci in BMW's Factory World Superbike squad. Also being in talks with Aprilia over a test rider role, as we see Yamaha's test rider bring that new V4 to a slow speed stop at the side of the track on the run down to turn 8. That's not coming out of it, certainly not that we could see, but yeah, you often see, particularly in these kind of sessions, when there's some sort of message, some sort of alarm that comes up on the dashboard, the rider will immediately stop the bike to risk doing any further damage. If there's one motorcycle and one engine, the Yamaha don't want to do any lasting damage to it. It's their new V4, so Augusto Fernandez doing the smart thing there. Yeah, well, they said this is all about a data gathering exercise. That's not the way that they would have wanted to see the V4 stopping on his public debut, but these things that do happen when you're chasing down to the second and when you're trying to develop what is from the ground up a completely brand new concept for Yamaha. Of course, no guarantee that that is an engine problem that's forced him to put something else with the motorcycle that's forced him to park it, but we can get an update from a Honda point of view down in pit lane and rejoin Jen. Yeah, I tell you what, these Honda guys are incredibly busy at the moment. Over recent weeks, as you guys have been saying, we've been talking so much about the new carbon swing arm, the new chassis, the latest Fargo felt was between 3 to 4 pence a lap, new aerodynamics package, new electronics. We can now throw into the mix on Luca Marini and Joan Mears bikes as across all 4 rounds. To introduce you across all. Unfortunately, it sounds like we've just lost our connection down in pit lane. Jack, we'll try and pick that up as possible. Jack, I think you're teasing us, buddy. You're teasing us. What's going on? You know that I like to play it up a little bit and get everybody excited. Drum roll, please. The new exhaust system on the Honda. There we go. And even some brand new rear aero for Luca Marini as well. So get more parts that Honda are throwing at this RC213V as they continue to find huge improvements. You know we always give you a drum roll in the comedy box here, Jack. As always, spot on, mate. Great information. Yeah, it feels like at the moment there's just an endless supply of parts feeding out of Japan right now to the factory Honda riders in particular. Marini has certainly been putting some of the updates to very good use of late, hasn't he? The Italian, of course, that brilliant double top 5 in Balaton Park, 4th in the sprint, 5th in the Grand Prix, 10th on the grid last time out in Catalonia, and he followed it home with points scoring places in both the sprint and the Grand Prix. So look who really comes to his home track. Got a confidence on a bit of a high at the moment. Crucially builds on this momentum. The Gian Antonio still looking strong as well in third place, 131.794. He's just looking for 3 clean days across this Grand Prix weekend, Lewis, because if he has a great Friday, he's an average Saturday and perhaps a not so bad Sunday, and then he's vice versa at the moment. I mean, sprints Saturdays of late for Digi have been A-OK. Second in Hungary, third in Barcelona. But if you look at his recent Sunday record, it is absolutely abysmal. In the last 5 Grand Prix, Digi has scored just 1 point. Not all of his own fault, we have to say, of course, with the big mechanical that cost him from the front row in Balaton Park. But Digi just looking for a smooth Sunday fun because it's gone horribly wrong for him. Because the bike barbecued itself in Austria too when Gian Antonio was going to score some points on that occasion. But yeah, he's been unlucky, and he was unlucky last weekend too in Barcelona. It was a bit of a chain reaction that set off ultimately leading to Gian Antonio going down. There was of course the contact into turn 1 between Frankie Morbidelli and Marco Bezzecchi, purely a racing incident. Pecco Bagnaia was next rider behind. He had to check up to avoid running into that accident, which then forced Gian Antonio to react as well. And unfortunately, he folded his Ducati whilst doing so, so not particularly Gian Antonio's fault either last weekend. And as you say, Saturday's been very good. Sundays certainly haven't been recently, and Fridays haven't been particularly great for Digia either, because in the last 4 Grand Prix, should I say now, we've seen Gian Antonio in qualifying 1, albeit in the last 2 occasions he did successfully go through. Well, so far so good for Digi because he's 4th fastest. We have a new leader though in this session, and he's bang in form, taking so much confidence from last weekend. Alex, he now leads with a 131.600. Fascinating to see this weekend how the beast is going to fare, because Enea Bastianini lives a stone's throw away from this Misano circuit with nearby Rimini. And when we talk about riders who have a love affair with their home round, well, the 27-year-old fits that bill perfectly. 5 at MotoGP stars here in the past. He's been on the box in all 5 into Sunday Grand Prix. Of course, he won here last year in the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. That was Ducati's 100th Premier Class victory as well. So a milestone day for the beast on the KTM this year with growing confidence. You do wonder whether Enea might have a profitable victory here on Sunday. Well, we're just talking about the Gian Antonio and the Portamina Enduro VR46 racing team. Frankie Morbidelli missing the first 10 minutes of this session after being back on the naughty step with the stewards. I wonder what their thoughts are of their home Grand Prix weekend from the boss, Pablo Nieto, who joins you. Yeah, always a big weekend in Misano for anybody associated with the R46. Pablo, after recent results as well, is there a bit of pressure on this weekend? It feels like a big result on Sunday in particular is needed. Yeah, it's like this, not that we like to arrive to our home Grand Prix and to have that pressure. That means that everybody is looking at us, and that means that we can make something important. So it's important to try to make something good on Sunday, because we see that on Saturday, more or less, we have very good results, but now we have to finish on Sunday. Frankie, yesterday there's talk in the paddock, the few stories that he was called up to speak to the stewards and was basically given a final warning. What was said in that meeting? Yeah, well, just the money was to the stewards to talk about the situation, because last weekend in Barcelona was a little bit hard for him, no, let's say, because now we get the 10 minutes penalty from the marshals because he took the bike and he went to the track when the marshal said that he cannot go. But sometimes with all the stress and everything, you are under pressure, and that's okay, no? And then we say to the steward that it was
on the red to make it a session and finish.
Was he told that if there's another on-track incident, then it would be a ride-through penalty, the next penalty?
Yeah, that's a different thing, no? Because also we was talking about all the situation because he already had one on lap penalty, and Mugello was with Vignales was a little bit under limit, and the steward decided that the next time he will make something. It's going to be a drive-through. So just we have to take a little bit more care in the first part of the race. No, it's when you have more stress, more things to try to make something wrong.
Thanks, Pablo. Good luck this weekend.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Thanks to the R46 boss, Pablo Nieto. So, yeah, confirmation of the reports that have been floating around this Mazzano paddock. Yeah, Frankie was put on notice by the FIA and MotoGP stewards here yesterday. Now, we've seen enough, and we don't want to see you anymore. Well, certainly want to see you for a few races, if that's all right by you, Frankie. So, the spare Yamaha Yamaha V4 is fired up for Augusto Fernandez to get back in this session. Seems an appropriate time while we're referencing VR46, and of course, what this Mazzano circuit means to Valentino Rossi living so close nearby into Vulia. Last night there was a very special occasion which the doctor himself attended. A special occasion for all concerned with MotoGP as we unveiled the new MotoGP Hall of Fame here in nearby Rimini, celebrating champions, their legacy and the future. Riders in attendance last night with 23 MotoGP World Championships, over 300 victories just in the theatre alone. The unveiling of a new Tower of Champions as well. It looked like a very, very special occasion. Hosted, of course, by our good pal down in pit lane, Mr. Appleyard.
Like a plush event, of course, as MotoGP recognises its magnificent history, whilst also, of course, having an eye on the future as it looks to go fast at forward, fearless into the future. And I think we pretty much know who's going to be lifting and celebrating with that new Champions Tower in a couple of weeks' time. Marc Marquez, I think Pecco Bagnaia made reference to that and had a little bit of joke when Double Sport CEO Carmelo Espeleta unveiled the new Champions Tower to the active MotoGP World Champions on the grid here this weekend in a private event yesterday. And I think Pecco Bagnaia said words to the effect of, well, I wonder who's going to be winning this one there at the end of this season. It does look spectacular, and yeah, a lovely touch as well to induct Hall of Famers. The criteria that's been set, 25 MotoGP victories, all 2 or more MotoGP World Championships gets you in, and we'll be joined by one of those Hall of Famers a little bit later on today.
Yeah, Kevin Schwantz, 1993 MotoGP World Champion, will be with myself and Lewis in the commentary box. I've got to say as well, got to mention it, Jack, he did look very, very dapper. He scrubbed up pretty well, didn't he, the lad, with his dicky bow on. Looking very smart last night, Jack. Well, thank you very much indeed. That one birthday, my mum said exactly the same thing as well. She said, oh, I squint at times. You know, normally we see him either in his Dawn uniform or his Bradford City shirt, so he did look very, very dapper last night. Yeah, great occasion for everybody connected to MotoGP. Is Alex versus Mark at the top of this P1 session. Those two have done 13 laps apiece in this session. Alex has just set his best time. That is one of the shots of the season, isn't it? Beautiful shot of Joan Mir on the factory Honda. One, of course, as Lewis mentioned, active MotoGP World Champions. Did it 5 years ago now, back in 2020. Yeah, the Cavone corner here in Mazzano, turn 11. One of the few remaining 6-gear corners on the Grand Prix calendar, when the MotoGP riders tipping through there at 285 kilometres an hour. Sort of cement from the boys, that one, doesn't it?
Certainly does, and yeah, it's a corner where we have seen MotoGP victories change hands there over the years. You certainly need some bravery and some skill to launch overtakes into there, but it can be done. Although it's not all a case of top speed around a circuit such as this one. It's certainly tighter and twistier than the Circuit of Barcelona Catalunya was last weekend. And you wonder whether that might potentially bring the field a little bit closer together. Of course, it was largely Ducati versus KTM last weekend, with the Marquez brothers ultimately having far too much for the KTM pair of Enea Bastianini and Pedro Acosta. At the moment, it is A Ducati 1-2, Aprilia third, Bezzecchi, Ducati fourth, the Gian Antonio, Honda fifth, Marini, and Yamaha sixth, Quartararo. Yeah, looking at Marini on screens right now, he spoke yesterday on the pre-event press conference of his satisfaction and how rewarding this experience with HRC had been. Of course, it's nearly 2 years now, November 2023, since Luca first threw his leg over the factory RC213V in that Valencia test, and he said the strides that Honda have made over the last couple of years are night and days. Long gone are the days where all 400 at times were stuck at the wrong end of the timesheets. I think Joan Mir said, didn't he, quite recently, it's time now, this RC213V in its current version is a top 6 motorcycle, no question about it. It's now up for the, well, down to the riders to deliver the performances, which you've had to say at the moment really certainly is. This might be potentially trouble in the top 3 here as Luca powers out of the final corner. Over the line he goes. Yeah, he does indeed, yeah, right on cue. 1:31.642, just 400ths away from Alex. Yeah, home sweet home so far for Luca. From the grid here in MotoGP, going back quite a few years actually to that, of course, when he was a VR46 rider, as we ride on board with one of their current crop, Frankie Morbidelli, and this is now out of Tramonto turn 10, and it is the Fiesta Cavone next. That's how good these guys are. That's how brave these guys are. Perfect time to ride on board with Frankie. It's fast Frankie at the moment as well, because this could be the best time of the morning session here. He tips it into the left-hander turn 16, where we saw Oliveira crash on the Pramac Yamaha a few moments ago. 7th to 1st it is indeed for Morbidelli. A 1:31.342 puts him over a quarter of a second clear then of Alex. Good job that by Frankie. It was a very good time to ride with him through those fast rights of 11, 12 and 13. Maybe should sit out the first 10 minutes of FP1 more often. It's clearly not held him back too much, has it? In this session, quarter of a second in his advantage over the Marquez brothers. A 1:31.3 for reference, the fastest ever MotoGP lap around this circuit. A 1:30 flat from Pecco Bagnaia last season. We have dry weather, which is fully expected for the rest of this San Marino Grand Prix weekend. Do not at all be surprised to see the first lap of this Misano circuit under 90 seconds. Yeah, I mean, given the fact that the VR46 Academy riders basically live at this Misano circuit, I mean, Morbidelli's just in a 1:31.342. Frankie could probably do a 1:32 around here, blindfolded, so a minor inconvenience, I think, wasn't it, to have those 10 minutes taken away from him this morning. It could get better at the moment for VR46 racing, because Didier, on a new soft front tire, as you can see on that graphic, he's making it pay on that GP25. Yeah, we've got a 1-2, we've got a Pertamina Enduro VR46 1-2 right now, so if the boss is watching, I'm sure he's going to be very, very happy. Morbidelli from the Gian Antonio. The other Valentino Rossi is here, or certainly in the area. Not at the circuit just yet. We tend to see him in the afternoon. That's his closest friend and director of the team, Lucio Salucci, watching on and liking what he sees at the moment with VR46 1 and 2. Of course, GP24 at the moment, leading GP25. The two factory Hondas inside the top 10. Marini fourth is having an excellent start to his home Grand Prix. Joan Mir just got up into 9th place with a 1:32.065. We've spoken very little about the KTMs, who really did shine throughout the Barcelona weekend. Let's find out. Pedro Acosta is in 10th place. Bastianini right now is 13th. That's 1 place behind his Tech 3 teammate Vinales. Brad Binder 14th. So 10th, 12th, 13th and 14th. So I'm seeing those KTMs stuck around mid-pack at the moment. Brad Binder here after what was a fast old crash at turn 7 in Barcelona last weekend, when he looked on course to put his KTM inside the top 10. Of course, fastest on Friday a week ago with Binder, and unfortunately the problems at the start of qualifying put him on his back foot. He ultimately qualified back on the 4th row. I haven't seen Binder on the front 3 rows of the grid all the way back in Aragon. As Bezzecchi looking to break the VR46 Team 1-2, or it could be a VR46 Academy 1-2-3 here if Bez can get the 16 wide done into Aprilia. Looks clean, it looks really tidy, doesn't it, for the 72. Over the line he goes, a 131.675. And from Bez, the busiest rider out on circuit so far this morning has been Binder. The South African has just completed his 20th lap of the session into the final 4 minutes of it. And just for good measure, here comes Mark late on. Shot, he's almost got his knee on the deck, and coming through his elbow on the deck rather, coming through these fast right-handers. Turn 14 up and coming up now. On the same tyres he started the session with, it's not as punishing a circuit this on tyres as the Catalunya circuit was a week ago, which was something much more. The Jorge Martino, you look what happened here last season when we did have that early rain, which really did transform the San Marino Grand Prix to the detriment of Martin, who came into the pits to change bikes, and I think not seconds after he did go pit lane, looked over to his right and realised how wrong he'd got it. Marc Marquez making early progress, which ultimately saw him win the Grand Prix. Yellow flags are out, and that is a second crash for Miguel Oliveira, not a morning that the Pramac Yamaha rider will want to remember. Yeah, that's a bit unusual, isn't it? Because he's not really a guy that's throwing himself down the road too often, is Oliveira. So to crash twice in one session, yeah, not the way that he wants to kick off this Misano round at all. As we were mentioning a few moments ago, he does have options on the table for 2026. If he wants to carry on full-time racing, he sings BMW and World Superbikes in their factory team, which is a pretty coveted seat, isn't it? That is on offer for Oliveira. There's also, I think, a pretty dangling a rather big carrot of a test rider role with some wildcard guarantees as well, which I think is also floating Oliveira's boat too. So some pretty big calls to make in the next week or so is what Miguel said. Tough to decide, but I guess at least he has got some pretty tasty options. Yeah, it's getting tasty. If anyone's after some spare food, there'll be some lunch going around at Pramac in the next couple of hours, because theirs has been well and truly cancelled, because they've got two Yamaha M1s of the inline 4 variety to repair over the course of the next few hours before Miguel Oliveira can take part in practice later on this afternoon. Pedro Acosta completes his penultimate lap. He's sick now at a 131.663. Ralph Hernandez has just lifted himself up the order into 8th, and Jorge Martin on his respective Aprilia is now up into 9th place. So we've now got Aprilia's 7th, 8th and 9th. Shot. What a shot that is. Pedro Acosta, the final turn, just shy of 115 kilometres an hour. Just shows how quick that crash was at the start of the session. And for Oliveira, the third gear through there. And just look at him already using that body to move the bike up onto the fat part of the tyre as he gets on the gas. trying to pick up the traction around this high grip Misano circuit. The heat haze from the exhaust. Beautiful, beautiful work from our slow-mo operators. Look, as always, a late flurry as far as Quattraro is concerned. A late crash for Morbidelli as well. So Morbidelli looks like he's going to top FP1 here in Misano, but it's essentially going to lead on the floor. He's in sector 3 as Morbidelli, so that might be a rather fast scratch if that is indeed correct. And we haven't seen there the bike being wheeled away. Unfortunately, we can see the rider walking away from it too. But it's through that sequence of right-handers where Morbidelli would appear to have hit the deck. Suspended for 10 minutes, fasted and crashes. That feels very Frankie Morbidelli. That feels very, very Frankie Morbidelli, doesn't it? A 131.342 then. I don't think he's going to be better by anybody at the end of this session. So Morbidelli will be fastest at the end of FP1. Fabio Quattraro, as you mentioned, did put up a strong late fight with a 131.591. It's the right onto the back straight rather than the right at the end of it, fortunately for Frankie Morbidelli. Into Tramonto he goes, and he didn't come out the other side. Turn 10, he hated in Barcelona, didn't he? Last weekend, because he cleaned out Jorge Martin in the sprint at turn 10, then crashed in the Grand Prix at turn 10 in Catalonia. Sick of the sights at the moment of turn 10s wherever he goes on planet Earth, isn't he? Frankie Morbidelli, that's another one for the collection. And I guess the knock-on effects for that, it's not going to impact his weekend too dramatically, because of course the session is over and this session does not count towards qualifying, but that could rob Frankie Morbidelli of the practice start at the end of the session. We've got the practice start session coming up very, very shortly, and it looks like it's a session that Frankie will miss. There's always drama, isn't there? Something's always happening when Frankie Morbidelli's out on circuit. He's going to get the scooter ride back, which is going to rob him of the practice start session. Let's look on the positive, shall we? Let's look at the glass half full. Morbidelli is your fastest rider in FP1 here at the Misano World Circuit. Marco Simoncelli. Frankie from Fabio in that session. Morbidelli, Quattraro and Gian Antonio. Alex and Mark, 4th and 5th, respectively. Top job by Marini, looking very, very strong once again on the factory Honda. He rounds out your top 6. Ralph Fernandez had a strong finish to that session as well. Put the Trackhouse Aprilia up into 9th place. That actually put him ahead of world champion Jorge Martin. Ayagura, his Trackhouse teammate, who was in the top 6 for just the second time in a Grand Prix in MotoGP in Barcelona on Sunday. A tough start to his first visit to Misano on the MotoGP. About 19th fastest was Agura. That put him ahead of Brad Binder. Augusto Fernandez on the new Yamaha-powered V4, despite some early technical issues. Still found a mid-132. That's a more than respectable lap time. As far as Fernandez is concerned, he outpaced the 2 LCR Hondas, who had a very poor morning. Zarco 22nd, Chantra 23rd. Yeah, I think Yamaha, in terms of the stopwatch, won't be too disappointed with that. Of course, they'll want to understand what happened on Augusto Fernandez's first V4 Yamaha that appeared to break down. Hopefully, from their point of view, it's not a terminal engine problem that they can sort of get him back out on that bike. Because as we've already heard from Mario Meregali, they haven't got exactly a bottomless pit of V4 powered engines to throw at that bike. If it was a terminal engine failure, if we saw it was clearly a terminal engine failure, they'll still say it was a mystery electrical fault. That's the official party line. Exactly. Let's go with a tried and trusted excuse to try and pull the wool over people's eyes. Acosta then ended that session in the 7th, and he did his work late on as well. 18 of 20 saw Acosta up into 7th place as the practice start session then gets underway. Just saw Fermin Aldeguer leaving pit lane now. He really was under the radar, wasn't he, last weekend in Barcelona? I think we felt like with the low grip conditions, his prowess at managing that rear grip late on, I think a lot of people, I'm sure including Fermin himself, were expecting better than 15th in the Grand Prix. His only point actually on a Sunday since his podium in Austria. Been a bit of a struggle, Black, hasn't it, for the rookie? Just goes to show, though, how much a weekend can change by a couple of thousandths of a second or so. Aldeguer missed Q2 out of Q1 on Saturday morning 6 days ago by 4 thousandths of a second. Of course, had he been the right side of that, who knows where he might have qualified, and who knows how his weekend might have gone. He missed it. He was 13th on the grid. That put him in the group that saw him take out Marco Bezzecchi in the sprint, and of course, along that penalty that he had to serve as a result of that, not paid to any hopes he had of scoring more than just that solitary point on the Sunday. So just goes to show, and it's going to apply to this afternoon's 1 hour practice session. Thousandth of a second can not only just decide whether you're in Q2 or you're in Q1, but it can totally transform your weekend. Good start to weekend as far as Martin is concerned. Here's Mummadai trying to get on the second bike, isn't he? He's in sprinter mode right now, is Frankie, to at least get out on the second bike, which will be prep. You can hear him just fire it up, actually. That's great work by VR46, and Frankie thankfully will then get to participate in this practice start session. I'm just about to reference Martin. That's been a strong start to the weekend for him in 10th place. Now, we kind of expected that because this is one of the few circuits where Martin does have a Aprilia RSGP experience. He came here, of course, in July. It was his first touch of a MotoGP bike since that horrible crash he had in the Qatar Grand Prix. I'm not going to say he immediately came back and was setting lap record pace, but at least he's familiar with the behaviour of the RSGP. He's got some references on that RSGP around this Misano circuit. And he was inside that top 10 once again on Sunday. As soon as he sorts out qualifying news on Aprilia, there's no question his race pace is right up there with the chance to fight for the podium, no question. Yeah, he said that he had the pace to potentially put as high as 3rd or 4th last weekend. But ultimately, a variety of issues for Jorge Martin ensured that that would not happen. 10th in the end, not a bad result at all, given where he qualified. But as I say, he's certainly got the pace to be certainly much higher than that if he can qualify well. So Augusto Fernandez successfully getting his Yamaha off the line. We did see the other bike, which I would assume is the bike that broke down early on in the session that was inside the box. Then you saw all sorts of lights blinking like a Christmas tree on the dashboard of that Yamaha. So the brain trust down there in the Yamaha camp, which essentially is the test team that Augusto Fernandez will be riding with this weekend, already looking to get to the bottom of the problem. Yeah, definitely a mystery electrical fault, that one. No question. Tell you what, that was an absolute belting start from Acosta. They've got that wheelie control dialed in, that launch control dialed in perfectly on that KTM. Now that front wheel, as he put 300 horsepower through the rear tyre, just did not move, did it off the ground. That's what you need. Just very, very short run down towards a tricky type. First couple of corners in Misano, there'd been plenty of drama there down the years. That was a very good start as well, wasn't it, by Fabio Quartararo on the factory Yamaha. And you heard it a moment ago when we were riding on board with, I think it was Alex Marquez. He barely got up a couple of gears before he was immediately braking for turn one. Let's get an update from the Yamaha with Jackie pit lane.
Yeah, I just went to grab a quick word to find out what they might say to me when I asked, what was the issue with that V4 engine? And you'll never guess what, guy. It's one of those electronical problems again, that you get. I mean, I was kind of predicting that, but yeah, that's electronics issue with the guys in the back of the box continue to huddle around the laptops and the computers to get a full understanding of what happened exactly.
Well, you know what, you could knock me down with a feather right now, here in the country. I bet you can hear with me handing over 20 euros to the gentleman, am I right? I bet Jack nearly keeled over in shock when he got told that one. Alex Marquez finds the Gresini Ducati away from that mark. Not clean at all. The front wheel was pretty quickly in the air as the second practice start gets completed then for Augusto Fernandez. Here's another couple of KTMs on the grid. We saw Costa was on the left-hand side there. Absolutely nailed his previous practice start. That sideshow there just giving indication just how low now these Monday MotoGP bikes sit with the whole shot devices engaged. Beautiful shot. What a shot this is. Almost like we're riding on board there, isn't it? With the KTMs as they fire away from the grid. Another good launch that by Pedro Acosta. I'm slightly curious with Frankie Morbidelli what the rule is on this, because he was late out for his Quattro start, because you can just see how much he's just using his own body weight. He's sort of like hunched over the fuel tank on that factory Yamaha, just trying to physically himself help keep some weight on that front tyre, make sure that there's not too much wheelie as he powers off the line. Looking at now Alex Rins and Marco Bezzecchi complete their practice start session. Again, just look how low that Aprilia was sitting from our rear-facing camera towards Bez. And what is 2 or 3 seconds before he's going a handful of front brake. Not necessarily turn 1 is the issue, it's that turn 2 that the left-hander, that tight left-hander where the field does really bunch up, where we've seen a lot of drama and chaos down the years. Fabio Di Gianantonio, well, his hopes of a normal and clean weekend so far have gone well. This is Frankie Morbidelli, of course, on the opposite side of the garage, who's... It's been another roller coaster session, hasn't it, as far as Frankie's concerned. A 10-minute suspension to start. A very impressive 1:31.342 to top the session. And to finish it all off, there's this late tip-off at turn 10 through Tremonti. It's such a tricky corner there. Your mind's already sort of halfway up the back straight up towards Cavone. Such an easy corner to get wrong as you are braking on the angle. And Frankie Morbidelli, of course, had to, I guess, thank one of the fastest scooter riders in Misano to get him back to the pits in time for that practice start. Here's Ralph Fernandez, who was 9th quickest in that morning session, part of that trio of Aprilias who were just at the bottom end of the top 10. As Ralph Fernandez looks to get himself back into the top 10, which we haven't seen him in now since that weekend in Austria where he qualified 9th and ended up finishing in that 9th place. Yeah, he was struggling with a brake issue, he said, last weekend in Barcelona. This did not allow him to ride constant, allow him to be consistent on the RSGP. What about Pecco Bagnaia? I'm struggling to recall the last time Bagnaia came to Misano, his beloved home round. Speaking to the media on Thursday and saying the objective is top 5. Rather modest expectations for a rider who normally comes to Misano, almost demanding himself, fully expecting himself to be firmly in the battle for the victory. Johan Zarco's a pretty rough start, it's fair to say, to this San Marino Grand Prix weekend. Zarco 22nd fastest on the LTR Honda, 1.5 seconds behind Frankie Morbidelli. Compared to the top Honda, he's about 1.3 seconds back. That is Zarco. I think he's talked to himself, Lewis. We know how hard he's pushing on that LCR Honda. We know he's giving his all, but I think even by his own admission, he's tipping off it a few too many times at the moment. Yeah, speaking of, you can see Miguel Oliveira damages to both sides of his leathers there, both the right and the left arm, well and truly scuffed up. Certainly not a morning that Miguel Oliveira will look back on fondly. He left one Yamaha in the fence at turn 16 before crashing slightly further on. This is the first of his crashes then into the Misano corner. Turn 16, this was shortly after Augusto Fernandez's V4 powered biker broke down, and it's a fast old corner there, and perhaps that wall coming at you a little bit faster than you'd like, and of course he'd returned on his second Yamaha before crashing that one too. Yeah, happy to see Miguel's looking A-OK, because there's been at times the last 2 or 3 years through no fault of his own where he hasn't bounced particularly well. Has he, Oliveira? So for the time being, Frankie can relax, because he has set at the fastest time here in FP1 in Misano. Mark did make some of the early running in that session. His best work at 1:31.611. We know there was no fresh rubber fitted to the factory Ducati. We saw the new Yamaha V4 out on circuit for the first time. The current inline 4-cylinder Yamaha powered M1 was very rapid, as it always is, in the hands of Fabio Quartararo, who was second fastest. For Frankie Morbidelli, who ended the session with a crash at turn 10. Poor morning for Frankie, but he did end it fastest from Fabio Quartararo. Fabio Di Gianantonio in 3rd, completing a good morning for VR46, at least on the timesheets. The Marquez brothers 4th and 5th, Alex ahead of Martin. Luca Brini, top Honda 6th, from Pedro Acosta, top KTM 7th, top Aprilia. Marco Bezzecchi 8th, ahead of Ralph Fernandez, Jorge Martin, and Pecco Bagnaia 11th. Mir 12th from Miller Oliveira, who, of course, as we saw, crashed twice. And then Bastianini, Fermin Aldeguer, and Maverick Vinales. Alex Rins 18th, ahead of Igor Brad Binder 20th. Augusto Fernandez, with those issues early on the first of his Yamahas, did at least finish 21st, and with only 1.1 seconds off the pace. Well, we'll get the lap by lap answer. Of course, Morbidelli's run one started 10 minutes later than everybody else's, but once he was out on Circuit Himazano, he was fast and at the front to 1:31.342 has put Frankie top of the pile for the entire session on a single set of tyres. Fabio Quartararo did put in a brand new soft front tyre for his final run, which would explain in part why he jumped up into second place, though did the entire session on the same medium rear tyre. Good morning to VR46, first and third. The best second best runner in that session was Fabio Di Giannantonio. Quickly down into the high 131s on the opening run, wasn't he, Digia? And then he ended it with a mid on 131. He was also out on a new soft front at the back end of the session. Well, we know that Marc Marquez did the entire session on a single set of tyres. Alex Marquez did do the entire session on one medium rear tyre, as you saw there at the start of run 2. He did put in a brand new soft front tyre, which enabled him to get down to a 1:31.6. Alex Marquez ends the morning in 4th place, 4th and 5th, ultimately, for the Marquez brothers. We'll get a little bit of a check then now on our sector times to see who was hot and who wasn't in the 4 splits. Fabio Di Giannantonio takes sector 1, close between himself, Marini and Morbidelli. Not a lot going on in sector 2, it's just a run down to turn 8 and out of it, but it was Jorge Martin top through there, who's braved through Cavone, that rapid turn 11. It's Marini, Morbidelli and Bettesecchi with a bit of track knowledge working in that 3rd split. Yeah, the VR46 Academy trio. Marc Marquez, though, through the predominantly left-handed final sector, though, with half a tenth over the VR46 duo. So Frankie Morbidelli starts his home Grand Prix here in San Marino suspended from the first 10 minutes of the session. He then fired in the best time of FP1 before there was a late crash. It was very much a Frankie Morbidelli session, wasn't it? The Brazilian, though, will lead the field into this afternoon's practice action, as we will find out who will be booking those direct spots into Q2. afternoon, everybody. What an eventful afternoon it's already been. Both on track and in the commentary box. Perhaps the biggest damage done so far on this Friday, which has seen its first year of crashes, is to the commentary box chair to my right, which is missing a pretty sizable panel, sending the bill to Mr. K. Giles for that one. But Moto 2 will continue despite the drama where we're sat, with pre-practice, or practice 2 should I say, still to come after pre-practice 1 earlier on today. A pre-practice 1 session put by the Moto 2 World Championship leader, Manu Gonzalez. Although that is his customary Friday form, it has to be said, particularly first thing on a Friday morning, he generally tops the first session of the weekend. Today was no exception. This is the session where it all truly counts. This is the session where Q2 places are on the line. Slip up here. You find yourself in a world of trouble when we go qualifying tomorrow afternoon. Sunny San Marino for our Friday afternoon's entertainment. Weather was absolutely miserable when we arrived here 48 hours or so ago. Grey skies, rain falling. That fortunately has moved away. And apart from sunny forecast, potentially for Sunday, we're not expecting any further rain until that point at the earliest. Manny Gonzalez will certainly be glad to hear that news after topping this morning's free practice 1 session. Just a smidge away from the old-time lap record set here last year. Jake Dixon second, continuing his recent upturn in form. Diogo Moreira, strong start for him in third. Celestino Vietti, twice a former pole sitter here in fourth. Courageous Grand Prix winner Danny Holgado, Frank Guevara, Barry Baltus all inside the top 8. Marcus Ramirez 9th ahead of the slightly injured, I think that's perhaps a mild way of putting it, Aaron Canet, after the crash out of Barcelona last weekend. A few of the big names slightly down the order. David Alonso, as always, a little bit of a slow burner through Moto 2 weekend, although he does generally get there by the time we get to the business end of Sunday. He was 18th earlier on today. Joe Roberts, he was 1 place further back in 19th place. Perhaps the biggest name out of position at the end of free practice 1 this morning, as you just saw. 30th place, no lap time set, was Colin Vaya, who was on the front row a week ago in Barcelona. And has already put himself slightly behind the 8 ball here this weekend after a crash at turn 12. First thing this morning. Lewis Sotheby and Neil Morrison with you for Moto 2 practice. 40 minutes to decide 40 names that will go through straight to qualifying 2. And as always, so relaxed. Manu Gonzalez, the World Championship leader, off to a flyer. Although that is generally what we come to expect from Manu Gas on a Friday morning.
Yeah, it's his default setting in 2025. Start the weekend off strong and look pretty unflappable no matter what circumstance you find yourself in. It's a pretty good situation for Manu Gonzalez after a very strong start to the day. Less so potentially for this rider here. David Alonso, the victor 2 races ago back in Hungary. And one of the sort of quiet stars, I think you could say, of Barcelona 1 week ago when he made a fairly heroic comeback from so deep on the grid. Managed to gain a quite ridiculous 17 places from 25th on the grid to finish in 8th. And as Lewis said, a bit of a slow starter earlier today, but I think this session should be more of a gauge, a clear gauge for where Alonso is currently at. And it's going to be pretty much an FP1 for Colin Vare, even though we've already had the first session of the weekend. Dutchman crashed in the very early stages of today, and you can see just under his right eye there, it looks as though Colin has had, is that maybe a consequence of some gravel potentially coming up into his helmet? I'm not too sure, but the Dutchman had to sit out, unfortunately, pretty much all of the first session of the weekend, and we'll be starting afresh here.
Well, we did see in the immediate aftermath of the crash, his visor was hanging off, so yeah, potentially a stone or something has made its way through the visor. Fortunately didn't hit Colin in the eye, just hit him below the eye, but already carrying some war wounds through this weekend. We've certainly seen Vaya in the best form of his Moto 2 career in recent rounds, so one would expect it's going to take a little bit more than that to throw him off his stride. What about Harry Canet then, who certainly doesn't look as if he's feeling any pain at the moment, looks as calm and contemplative as he usually is before a Moto2 session gets underway. Crashed out of the Catalan Grand Prix, continuing on has been a bit of a summer slump for the 44. It's 5 Grand Prix now since we last saw him on a podium, and none of the results since then have even been a top 5. 6th in Hungary is his best result since the summer break. And that is why Aaron Canet comes here, not only with a quite literal pain in the neck, but also with a 38-point championship deficit to close down.
Yeah, 16 points from the last available 100 for Canet. That's just not good enough at this crunch point of the season. He really needs to get his act together if he wants to win his first World Championship in 2 months' time. Just saw Danny Holgado looking on. He was another strong starter to the weekend here. Holgado was impressive in 6th this morning. And Jake Dixon, I think, will be very content with how his weekend got underway. 96. A very competitive second, and had a really strong second half of the session, challenging Manny Gonzalez, Diogo Moreira consistently for the fastest time. Dixon looking pretty content in the gut box as well.
It was a mixed morning for American racing earlier on today. They've got 3 riders out there this weekend, with the additional wildcard of Alberto Sura also in action. Sura on the Andipper ART machine. The ART in that team name, the Stanford American Racing Team, had an early spill this morning. Marcos Ramirez was up inside the top 10 for virtually the entire session. Joe Roberts found himself somewhere in the middle of all of that. 19th place for him and 1.1 seconds off the pace. Ethan Guevara was another standout name on the Sunday in Barcelona and carried some of that form here this weekend. Guevara 7th quickest this morning, one of 3 Boscoscoros up inside the top 7. And certainly showcased his defensive skills a week ago with the World Championship leader breathing down his neck.
Yeah, you know, certainly did. It was a good performance from Guevara, who finished 5th, as you said, Lewis, and he's now looking to kick on and start getting podium finishes in his final part of the year. Diogo Moreira looks very deep in contemplation just ahead of this session getting underway. It is a crucial weekend for the Brazilian, who cannot put another foot wrong in the next couple of weeks coming up. Finds himself 42 points in arrears of Manny Gonzalez in the championship. But Moreira was very quickly in the zone this morning. One of maybe a handful of names that looked like early favourites. Maybe a bit early to be judging that in the weekend so far. Perhaps we could put this rider in there as well, Lewis.
Federagius, who certainly expected to have left the Catalan Grand Prix with some points, let alone a podium. That's what we were expecting from him. Certainly when we came off the air on Friday afternoon, we'd noticed in the session how strong his race pace had been. That was backed up by the lap-by-lap analysis, but no real signs of that showing up in the race itself. He's just looking for, I guess, a turnaround in fortunes as much as his competitiveness. His pace hasn't really been a problem in recent Grand Prix. It's just completing a clean weekend. Albert Arenas will be looking for much the same this weekend. After qualifying very well on the Saturday afternoon in Barcelona, that was about where the good news ended from Albert's point of view. He was one of that group of riders that were given a 9th-place grid penalty, which dumped him way down the grid to 13th place, and then issues with the bike, which he said were down to human error in the Grassini box, which left him without a motorcycle in which he could fully challenge and fight with. As a result of that, Arenas, like Aegis, scored nothing last weekend in the Catalan Grand Prix, and I guess when a problem is occurring that is outside of your control, there's no good time for that to happen, but when you're scrambling just to secure a place on the grid for 2026, certainly the worst possible timing from Arenas' point of view.
Yeah, most certainly was. Disappointing for Arenas at his home round. He normally goes well at the start of Barcelona, Catalonia as well. We just saw Philip Salat on our screens. Good to see the Czech rider back in amongst it here this weekend after it was a really frightening collision at the first turn. The Catalan Grand Prix, a couple of laps in, and well, it wasn't so much the collision that was a real cause for concern, but basically he got caught up with his bike just afterwards, which caused a lot of us to look away from our screens when we saw that, but thankfully it was more or less good to go and okay. Just a couple of hours after the race itself, so he is back on track here this weekend. Understandable that he was maybe a little down there this morning, down in 16th But as we said, early stages of the weekend. And I have to say that it was extremely competitive. In this morning's session, we were pretty much on all-time lap record pace right from the off in FP1. We didn't quite break the all-time lap record set by Aaron Kinnett here 1 year ago, but we were within a couple of hundred seconds of that time and that record. So I'm pretty sure, Lewis, that it will go in this session.
Yeah, we are running slightly softer tyres here this weekend than we have previously in Moto2. We do see the return of the super soft rear tyre here this weekend, although it's a slight development of the SDX that we saw earlier in the year in the E125 soft tyre, which is essentially the harder of the two rear tyre combinations this weekend, soft and super soft. In action here this weekend, which is inevitably going to see lap times slightly lower than we have had in previous Grand Prix, but as Neil mentioned, we were nearly inside that record pace by the end of pre-practice one, just 400ths of a second between Manu Gonzalez and the current, stress current, because it's not going to stay that way for long, all-time lap record held by Aaron Kinnett. Pole position for the San Marino Grand Prix last year. 40 minutes of this practice session coming up, and it's within 90 seconds, gone pear-shaped for Tony Arbolino. I think he's at turn 4 there, isn't he, on his outlap, but whatever's gone wrong, Arbolino is now immediately on his back foot. It didn't appear as if there was some obvious damage to the bike, so has there been some sort of early mechanical drama for the Boscoscura?
Yeah, Marshall's pointing Tony Arbolino to get onto the service road. Hopefully he can get his machine picked up from there, but not an ideal way to get his practice session underway. So Arbolino has been in doldrums of late. You know that his time in that team is fairly limited, and he's coming here on the back of just an absolute shocker of a weekend in Barcelona. Completely disastrous from, well, Saturday morning right the way through to Sunday afternoon. Arbolino, no points on the board 1 week ago, and 20th place. Really just so far below what we know Tony Arbolino can do. We can do is what we saw at this track here 1 year ago. In the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix, we had 2 Grand Prix at this venue in 2024. The second of those, Arbolino was in absolutely fine form. Came within, what, 3 corners of his first victory of the season? Didn't quite arrive, and there is confirmation that it is a technical issue which has Arbolino stopped at this early stage.
Yeah, he made it through 3 corners. Of course, the pit lane exit feeds you into turn 3 essentially. It sort of takes you around the outside of turns 1 and 2 and then feeds you up to the outside of 3. So he basically got to the point where he was releasing the pit limiter. And obviously he didn't get the feedback he needed or wanted from his Triumph-powered Boscoscuro machine. So after we came into this session with Colin Vire, with no laps next to his name, Tony Arbolino might be about to do the same in reverse. We have a relatively strong first session this morning. Arbolino was inside the top 14 this morning, but essentially nothing to speak of this afternoon. And this, of course, is the session where we decide Q1 and Q2 places. So the worst moment in the weekend for Arbolino to encounter problems. As we have first lap times on the board, then we're expecting lap times firmly into the low 35s, if not 34s, by the end of this session. David Alonso's popped in an early 136.357. And from Alonso's point of view, that's around about 0.3 of a second shy of what he did earlier on today. There were an awful lot of laps getting cancelled earlier on today. Incidentally, if you're Wilberg, 3rd and 4th at the moment. I haven't seen anything particularly representative yet from the World Championship leader, Manu Gonzalez, who was late out of the pits at the start of the session. He's in 13th spot at the moment.
Yeah, just jumped up into 7th as Gonzalez, so no drama from him at the start of this session. You can see this is quite a fast and competitive little group here. Aegis and Alonso vying for position on track, but good stuff that from Dixon early on. We were saying earlier today during FP1 that this has not really historically been a great track for the Brit. He was 5th here for the first race that we had here last year, the San Marino GP, and then he crashed out of the second race, and that kind of started a bit of the bike during the Hungarian Cup. Obviously helped him out in the last 2 races. Feel that if he can be fast here and in the podium fight, then that will really bode well for his late attack in the flyways.
Boscoscuro has had won 2 of the last 4 Grand Prix here. Aigura, on his way to the World Championship last year, won the San Marino Grand Prix, and 2 years prior to that we saw the fairy tale first victory for Alonso Lopez on board the Boscoscuro, as he belatedly, I guess, launched his Moto2 career, having joined partway through that season. Lopez arrives here to a circuit which, of course, does carry those strong memories on the back of the best dry result of 2025 last time out in Barcelona. We have seen Lopez on the podium, of course, this season. Back in Austin, that was a rain-affected Grand Prix, but we haven't seen him achieve a dry result on the level of Catalonia all season. 7th place for Alonso Lopez. So finally some green shoots of recovery for him as he gets set to move to a team not too far from here, the Gresini squad in Moto2 next year. Wasn't sure if we were going to go on board with Diogo Moreira for a lap, but it was a brief view of his rear end as he comes out of the final turn. Another strong start to a session for Diogo. People can tell that he is very much up for it this weekend, judging by what we've seen so far this Friday. A little more interested in the number 44. You can see his current time on the bottom of your screen. Go on board with him right now as he comes around turn 14, the Cano corner, into this fast left at turn 15. Canet has come agonisingly close to victory here on a couple of occasions in previous years. We mentioned earlier the fact that Celestino Vietti beat him out of that final turn in the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix last year, as Canet goes up into second. Also seem to recall missing the gear coming out of the final turn when he was fighting for the podium back in 2021. So he's consistently been up there as Canet, but never quite managed to get the job done on Italian soil. But slots into second, and this is shaping up to be quite an interesting fight this weekend, Lewis, because all of the big hitters in the championship, the likes of Canet, Moreira, Gonzalez this morning, even Vietti and Dixon and Baltus, are also looking quite strong. So, I mean, this is what we want to see. We want to see the big hitters in the championship trade blows. Haven't seen so much of it this year, to be fair. And potentially, Sunday could be a chance for us to witness that. Yeah, and it's not a Grand Prix that we're expecting to be quite as critical from a time management point of view as we saw in Barcelona. Which is part of the reason why Pirelli have been able to go a little more aggressive on the tyre, particularly in the rear tyre for this weekend, bringing the super soft to Barcelona last weekend, one of the most punishing for the Pirellis, with relatively low grip, and playing a lot of long corners as well, where you really are trying to manage the spin. This particular circuit, the Misano World Circuit, Marco Simoncelli, much drippier and much less severe on the tyres. It's more about generating the temperature early on, as we often see crashes into corners such as turn 15. A few left-handers in the second half of this lap. But it's a Grand Prix where you're much more inclined to push from start to finish rather than have thoughts of any kind of tyre management. And considering Diogo Moreira's words of last weekend when he expected to really struggle in a race where time management was so key, I certainly feel a Grand Prix, both the circuit and the characteristics of the race on Sunday, are likely to bring Moreira much more into play than we saw at any stage in Barcelona.
I think that is a fair comment. Just looking at some of the times that the riders out on track are putting in at the moment, midway through a bit of a longer run, 7 or 8 laps in to this longer run, and it seems that if you want to be super competitive here, lapping in the mid 1 minute 35s is going to be a fairly competitive pace, at least in the early stages of the race. We're seeing several names do that, and certainly Aegis actually doing better than that, down into the low 1 minute 35s just there. So saw Connect around about the mid 35s, as we did with David Alonso and Manny Gonzalez. So early signs for those 4 riders that I've just mentioned are pretty good in this session.
Yeah, for a bit of a comparison, we've got Holgado at the moment doing it at 35.6. Dixon was on a 35.5 last round, connected at 35.4, Moreira at 35.5, and Manny Gonzalez at 35.6. So not a lot to choose between them, as they're all out on track at the same time. Of course, these lap times could still decide who goes through the Q2, depending on what happens later on. But this is the sort of homework being done ahead of Sunday's 22-lap San Marino Grand Prix to come. Dixon goes across the line this time on a 1:35 0.4. Good luck coming in here from Gonzalez, who could go to lift himself up from his current 6th place. Is right aboard with him now through that challenging turn 15. I see many a race victory won and lost through there. Pecco Bagnaia will tell you all about that from 2021, where not only did he lose the race, but he lost the World Championship to Fabio Quartararo. Gonzalez set to improve and improve he does, down to a 1:35.237. It is now intact 2 and 3.
Really good, strong stuff this from Gonzalez. Strong stuff this as well from Aegis. You feel he's coming here with a bit of a point to prove after a disastrous weekend, or a disastrous Sunday, sorry, I should say, in Barcelona. Before that, it was by no means disastrous. He had a pretty good qualifying and showed really good speed on the Friday, but it did not come together at all on the Sunday for the Australian. Qualified 8th, ended up in 18th after suffering from a real lack of rear grip in the second part of the race and just fell way down the order. But looking pretty good here at the moment is Aegis, sitting in 2nd position.
Sitting in his chair at the moment, and 15th overall is Dani Munoz for Red Bull KTM IO. Gotta be honest, Neil, after taking your first Grand Prix podium, surely someone's gonna be forking up the cash to sponsor his crash helmet, surely.
Exactly. Although, to be fair, from a commentary point of view, I love it. It's so easy to differentiate both himself and his teammate Colin Baird, so I'm not necessarily against it. It is certainly distinctive, but yeah, you would think by now he would maybe have 1 or 2 stickers on there just to show that he's riding at the World Championship, and you know, there's lots of young Spanish companies that want to be part of his journey.
It's usually part of a Grand Prix rider's life and procedure, isn't it? If they're in platform after a Grand Prix, they've got the crash helmet, they're showing off all the sponsors, they've got the energy drink water bottle that they hold, they've got the sunglasses on the cap, they've got all sorts of various obligations to fulfill. Whereas what Dani Munoz had to worry about was which camera to smile at and the trophy to lift after a Grand Prix result which I wouldn't say completely puts him on the radar of Moto2 teams, because I think they were all already well aware of just how good a rider he was, but the result to back that up, and I did just enjoy just the innocence of, I can't quite believe I'm here, from Dani Munoz after taking a result such as that. I don't think it was surprising us the way he'd gone through that weekend, but there was a bit of a pinch myself moment for Dani when he stood in front of my man on the podium.
Yeah, I mean, I must say, I could sit here and say, oh yeah, I was expecting it after looking at his speed through the weekend, but it's one thing having decent pace on a Friday afternoon, but then to go out and ride like he did was really quite remarkable, and a real coming-of-age ride, you feel, for Dani Munoz at the World Championship level. We've certainly seen potential for him when he stood in as a replacement rider in the past, and he's by no means disgraced himself in previous appearances, substituting for Denis Sonju, but the manner in which he really took the fight to Jake Dixon in that fight for second was really, really impressive for such a young rider. And what I liked, when we went to speak to him after the race, he apologised beforehand. I'm really sorry for my English. And then went on to speak in very, very acceptable English. So he's modest to boot as well, which I certainly liked about him.
Yeah, had already scored points in Aragon and in Austria already this season. So it was certainly the best results and best performances seen from him, but it certainly wasn't the only quietly impressive ride from Dani Munoz so far this year, and we are expecting him to be a full-time Moto2 rider. We're expecting him actually to be on this bike that we're riding on board with next year, with the likelihood that Diogo Moreira is going to be an LCR Honda MotoGP rider next season. That is certainly the way the wind appears to be blowing. And in terms of likely replacements, it does appear as if the rider at the top of the Italtrans shopping list is Dani Munoz, to slot it alongside Adrian Huertas next year.
Yeah, it sounded like they were keen on Barry Baltus, but Baltus decided to stay with Fantic. Sounds like Sergio Garcia was actually another very, very strong contender for that Italtrans seat. And I think it's out. Oh, someone's gone down, as we can hear in our headsets. You might be able to hear at home as well. Yellow flags are out in sector number 3. And we wait anxiously to see exactly what happened. But yeah, it looks as though Munoz will be going to Italtrans next year. It is Baltus, just as I mentioned his name, so let's hope that the Belgian is okay.
It didn't sound like a fast crash in our headsets, and it's by the looks of it quite a slow one. That's at Tremonto at turn 10. He's just wheeling his bike into the long lap penalty loop there. Baltus, who currently sits in 9th place. This is the crash that he suffered. We did see Frankie Morbidelli go down here in the MotoGP session earlier on this morning. It looked like the rear came round on him there as he was trying to gently feed the power in to fire back down the back straight up towards Cavone. Some slight damage, as you can see, one of the brake protectors lying on the racetrack, and that is Jake Dixon, who's also gone down. Dixon down at the final corner, turn 16, so your current session leader, it might be just as well that he's put in a 1:35.068 because he's gone down, and here's how he did it.
Sounded like just the first touch of throttle there as he was coming through turn 16, the final turn on the track, and the front just gave away. So, bit of a strange one, that. You see Lacuna Castro saying there to Graham, the Olin's technician, that maybe the front was pushing after the touch of throttle there. So, current number one in this session is looking down the barrel of 10 or 15 anxious minutes as he tries to get, firstly, his bike back to the Mark VDS box, and then back repaired and ready to go on track again. But as you said, Lewis, a 35.0, considering the current lap record is a 34.93, perhaps Dixon has already done enough to get a spot inside the top 14 come the end of this session.
Yeah, what he might particularly lose out on is the extra homework that he can do this afternoon to get himself ready for the race on Sunday, as Munoz now moves himself up into the top 14, just ahead of Ivan Ortola. And while we're mentioning the Spaniard's name, it's going to be Ortola. We did have some news during the lunch break regarding that MSI squad for next season. It's news that will surprise precisely none of you, but it is worth officially confirming it anyway. The Senna just tries to keep himself out of the way and to make the mistake in the final corner. We now know officially the MSI lineup for Moto 2 next season. They've got a 3 lineup. May have to wait a little longer because that might well be dependent on which riders are eligible through Rebel Rookies and Junior GP. But Angel Piqueras, their current Moto 3 championship contender, will be moving up to join Ivan Ortola in what, on paper at least, looks like a pretty tasty Moto 2 lineup for next season.
Yeah, decent Moto 2 lineup, and being honest, I thought that was confirmed like back before the summer break. I think
Look at his red, didn't we?
I think it was around Aragon time when obviously things went a little bit south with Sergio Garcia that we heard that Karas would be stepping up with that squad next year. Remains to be seen whether it will be with Norman Rank, who's currently spannering for Vinay Oradre, ex-Ayagura crew chief, of course, and highly successful in that. He went on to win the World Championship in his first year with that team, with the Boscoscuro chassis as well. Pick up any kind of evidence of what we can, what Jake is saying to his team, but I think he's swiftly away to change his leathers to make sure he's ready. Get back whenever his bike is ready.
It's now up to 11th place, 35.5 for him. Celestino Vietti going very quickly at the moment too, halfway around his lap, so we'll keep an eye on his progress as we now pick up Antonio Fuertes. Of course, hasn't always had the luxury of knowing the circuit he's racing at before he turns up, but he does here. Fuertes a double winner on his way to the World Supersport Championship here last year, and Fuertes is making himself a bit of a reputation as a bit of a first lap specialist. He's made some enormous lap 1 gains in recent Grand Prix as Celestino Vietti now takes top spot and does set a new all-time lap record on a 1:34.916. There is Fuertes just through the picture. In the last few Grand Prix, Brno he gained 5 places on that one. Austria he gained 9. Hungary he gained 8. Of course, that moved him all the way up into 4th place on the first lap. In Barcelona last time out, he gained another 8 places. Clearly, in the rough and tumble of opening laps in Moto 2, Fuertes, particularly at home, the big challenge for him now is to try and put that particular strength to good use from slightly further up the grid.
Yeah, absolutely, and he is a graduate, of course, of the World Supersport 300 class, and, well, you have to get your elbows out pretty much every single corner in that series. It's a decent bedding in for some riders, as Manu Gonzalez has obviously proved as well, former champion in that category. So there have been signs of it, hasn't there, that Fuertes is starting to find his feet after a tricky mid-season spell when he came back from that collarbone injury he sustained in Le Mans. Really was in the doldrums for quite a few races. I think there was a 6-race run where he went without scoring points, and A double former world champion, that must feel like an absolute day and age. But, yep, really, I think things hungry when we had the strongest performance of the season and more progress in Barcelona after a bad qualifying. Then, yeah, we are starting to see some signs of light for the number 99, and reason why Italtrans put so much faith in him to stay in 2026.
It's potentially challenges coming up for him in the next few Grand Prix, of course. We've got circuits coming up that he will not be particularly familiar with. In terms of taking next up in a couple of weeks' time before we head straight on to the Mandalika circuit in Indonesia for another pair of Grand Prix on the other side of the world. Phillip Island in Australia, which although the World Superbike Championship has been to, won't be a circuit that Veritas has had the luxury of riding around on a Supersport bike, of course. The Sekang International Circuit in Malaysia too will be brand new to Adrian. So 14 minutes of this session to go, and as mentioned, we do now have a new all-time record holder. It is Celestino Vietti. When Celestino is up there on a Friday, then generally you need to take his challenge very, very seriously. This is a circuit, as mentioned, that Vietti has a pretty strong record at. Winner of the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix last year, and pole sitter in 2022 and 2023. Vietti, whose qualifying record this season, no, it's way sugarcoating it, it's a poor one. Only one front row start this season, that was all the way back in Buriram, round one of the season. But around a circuit that is a VR46 Academy graduate, Celestino will know this better than anyone else in this Moto2 class, and he's certainly putting that track knowledge to pretty good use today.
Yeah, he most certainly is. Won last year's race, and back in 2023, Pedro Acosta very honest for the majority of that Grand Prix. Is that my friend and colleague Gareth Harford there from Golden Goose? I think it was. Quick shout out to Gareth, who's obviously bearing these high afternoon temperatures and the sun, which is very, very strong, even at this advanced stage in September here on the east coast of Italy. We are expecting to have conditions similar to this all 3 days, I believe. And this practice session so far giving us a decent indication of where everyone is at. One thing I'm quite eager to find out is just what stage of that run did Vietti set the new lap record on, because he set 13 laps currently, and that was set on the 11th of them. If that was 11 laps in, then I think everyone else is going to be thinking, goodness, we have a bit of a job on our hands trying to keep him under wraps on Sunday. But I'm not sure if maybe he just pitted before that.
Well, we have seen, of course, in previous Grand Prix here, fastest lap set right at the end of proceedings, as briefly alluded to earlier on. It's not the kind of circuit here where you are going to see that savage tyre drop that we saw in Barcelona, where there were already comments and Colin Byer was trying to keep himself calm and just say, you know, it will come. He is playing catch-up in this weekend, so don't expect too much from him early on. But yeah, the school of thought was last weekend in Barcelona that the tyres had maybe one or two good qualifying laps in them before they really fall off the edge of the cliff. In the San Marino Grand Prix here last year, Alonso Lopez, he set the fastest lap of the Grand Prix on lap 8 of the Grand Prix. The Emilia Romagna Grand Prix, our second Grand Prix last year, it was on lap 4. Celestino Vietti set the fastest lap for the race, but deep into the Grand Prix they were still doing very competitive lap times. The fastest lap was a 35.4, they were still doing 35s on the final lap here, so there isn't a particularly steep drop in terms of tyre performance, so perhaps does lend itself to be able to set fast lap times further into a run than we would normally come to expect in Moto2, but there are some laps on that tyre. 134.916 is an impressive lap, whatever way you cut it, from Celestino Vietti.
Yeah, there's no question that the riders in the VR46 Academy are just so accustomed to riding around this Misano World Circuit. Marco Simoncelli.
And it shows up through here, doesn't it? Through these fast right-handers, through Cavone, turn 11, and also through 12 and 13. We saw in the MotoGP session this morning, through that third sector, it was a VR46 Academy rider, 1, 2, 3, through that sector. You really do need to carry the ultimate commitment as you're tipping it into turn 11 at the thick end of 200 miles an hour.
Yeah, I think we saw that even in when Ducati did their promotional event here. Is it the World
World
Series?
Ducati Week.
Yeah, World Ducati Week. They had that race last year. And even Marc Marquez was full of admiration for what Pecco Bagnaia was able to do through a Curvoni. He was still trying to work out just what kind of line he was taking through the turn and which gear he was in whenever he came here for the GP a couple of weeks later. It is hard work out there, judging by the expression on David Alonso's face. Alonso currently in 13th as we head towards the time attack stage of this practice session. But yeah, historically, the VR46 Academy riders always been so strong here. We saw that with Lorenzo Baldassarri and his victory here in 2016. We saw that with Pecco Bagnaia with his victory here in 2018. And obviously, over the last 4 seasons, Celestino Vietti has either been incredibly fast or has been finishing on the podium. And by the looks of it, he could be on course to do that once again in 2025 because he's on yet another fast lap time on this current lap.
Yeah, this is a really impressive run from Vietti because he did that 34.9 and his last 3 laps he's done have been 35.1, 35.1, 35.1. He is on a really consistent, quick run here. He's the number 13. So showing a level of consistency on these tyres that will certainly catch plenty of attention. I'll take down this Moto2 pit lane. Let's see what kind of lap time this is. Is it going to be another 1:35.1? Potentially better? I've been lying. It is a 4th consecutive 1:35.1. That's consistency for you.
Yeah, well, certainly is. Vietti, I think, putting his name in the picture to be the potential favourite at this early stage of the weekend. It's a word that means nothing in the end. Things can obviously change quite significantly from here, but Vietti, early stages anyway, and early indications are that he is sitting very pretty indeed, as we just saw Aaron Canet head out, and expect to see some red crash helmets and red sectors coming up in your screens here as we see Jake Dixon has managed to get back out on track. Good job there from the Mark VDS technicians who managed to repair his bike.
Yeah, that's a bit of a save in some respects for Dixon. Generally, when you crash at turn 16, you would expect a little more damage to be done to the bike than that. Really go away without too much damage, and seemed that the only thing that really needed changing were the leathers. For Jake Dixon, who's now back on track as we pick up the Catalan Grand Prix winner, Dani Holgado, who might well move himself up from 10th to 2nd here. Estimation is that he's going to go up into 4th place. As we follow the 27 now into the final turn 16. You can see the chattering there on the front end as he goes across some minor bumps into the final corner. And Holgado actually goes even further up than that. He goes fastest overall, and he now takes over the all-time lap record.
Dr. Van de Gerberg has 2 moments going in and going through turn number 1. First one was on the entry, the second one was midway through the turn there. The Dutchman did well to save that. He's got himself up inside the top 10. Albert Arenas makes significant progress there, 35.0. So you're probably looking at a lap in the low 35s. It's necessary to, as Holgado gets it all crossed out coming out of turn number 6. It's all kicking off here. We've got a yellow flag in sector number 1 as well. Holgado, I think, he's just scared himself ever so slightly, understandably so.
It's perhaps a rather tender and slightly uncomfortable part of his anatomy there after that. It's Marcos Ramirez who's gone down. He was right behind Holgado on the racetrack when he set that lap record. He's gone down at turn 4, where we did see him go off through the girl trap earlier on today when he stayed upright. He wasn't quite so lucky this time.
A bit of a complicated day for the American racing team so far then, as Baltas comes across the line, goes from 11th up into 6th. And we are starting to see something from Tony Arbolino finally. Obviously, has just put a commentator's curse on the number 14. His lap has gone away from him, coming down in towards turn 14.
It's just his second time lap of the session as he's now waving his hands at the ride behind him. Of course, we have seen riders already pick up warnings and penalties last weekend for excessive slow sector, so Arbolino can't afford to cruise for too long on this lap, nor has he got the time to really be afforded that luxury. 6 minutes to go, and this is essentially the start and end of his session, really. Let's have a look at what happened then. Is he going to catch some traffic? No, he's already going to run in slightly hard and then tries to tip it in with Zonta van den Gorberg on his own hot lap, firmly in the way.
I think he can have no complaints there. Sunderland Gerberg on a fast old lap of his own.
Can't wait around forever.
Yeah, exactly. Papadino was not exactly on lap record pace there. So, yeah, I think that is entirely fair from the Dutchman. The yellow flags have been causing a bit of chaos for lap times. You can see Aaron Kinnett has just had his fastest lap time cancelled. But what about this from Jake Dixon? He was fastest about 20 minutes ago. He's been shuffled back into fourth, but Dixon is looking to reverse that once again.
Of course, at the point that he went fastest, he was fastest by quite some margin, wasn't he? A good quarter of a second clear at that point, and it doesn't appear as if the tip-off at turn 16 has dented the confidence one iota for the 96, as he drifts a little behind Holgado through the third sector. We've got Salax right behind him. Then we have Alonso Lopez just in the back of the picture. They are also on personal best. Van den Gorberg also potentially on lap record pace, but we'll pick up Dixon first through the final corner. It's right there as you feed back onto the racetrack. You've got to avoid touching the green. Dixon did avoid that, and he moves up into third place now on a 1:34.9.
Yeah, super promising day this for Jake Dixon. Really strong Friday so far, with the exception of that fall down at turn 16. You can see yellow flags out. Looks as though we've had another crash at turn 13. Don't want to say anything just yet, but it does look like an orange mark on one of the IO bikes, maybe one of the Speed RS machines. I'm not too sure, but oh, it's
It is one of the Boscoscuros. It's the wild card of Ferrandez, the 93, who's gone down. Ferrandez had found a 36.3 earlier on in this session, which was slightly quicker than he went earlier on today, but he won't be going through the Q2 on his Grand Prix debut. Van den Gorberg, as you can see, went 5th, as we now follow Huertas over the line into 10th, so Kinnett's not going to improve because he's been relegated back down to 12th place, and perhaps having caught those yellow flags, Kinnett and Moreira, 12th and 13th, sitting a little uncomfortably.
yeah, two riders that were starring this morning, or certainly Moreira was starring earlier today. Moreira goes into 7th, so that'll probably be job done at 35.1 for the Brazilian.
And he's for Huertas. He just had that lap time cancelled. The lap that briefly put him into the top 10 at 1:35.2. He's now been shuffled backwards again. Dixon is continuing to lap on near enough record pace. Can he perhaps succeed where he relatively failed the lap before when he drifted in the fourth sector? But all lap time is getting dumped up our screens now. Moreira's had a lap time cancelled, although I don't think it was his fastest lap of the session that's been cancelled. Here comes Dixon then across the line. It's another low 35. He stays in third place.
Yeah, and it's pretty clear where Dixon needs to work. It is in that final sector. Understandable if he's been a little cautious after his fast fall at turn 16 earlier in this session. See David Alonso coming through the final turn now. Oh, where is Alonso? 18th for him. It's been another tricky Friday, but he is on course to improve that somewhat with the 14th fastest time. Don't think, though, that 35.3 will be enough to see him through automatically.
Yes, Huertas behind is continuing to push on. Here he is on the 99. Both the Italtrans riders are going fast in these final 3 minutes. Huertas having his last lap time cancelled. If this one stands, it's good enough for 11th place, which does bump Alonso out and puts his teammate Moreira right onto the cusp of potential Q1 here, but this could be the Brazilian rectifying that. Here he comes across the line, 14th now, all the way up into 4th, and he's now in the 134s.
Yeah, that will be job done then for the Brazilian. The Taltrans crew look on, fairly content with their day's work so far. As we see Barry Baltas here on another fast, impressive time. There's so many names that are jumping up towards the front here, Lewis, which you think could be contenders when we get round to qualifying tomorrow for a place on the front row. Baltas certainly is one of them after what we've seen so far today, although he, like Dixon, is maybe struggling ever so slightly in that final sector.
Sasaki over the line, he misses out at 35.4 for him. Kinnett is right on the bubble here in 14th place, and we're tracking his sector times. He's on a so-so lap, but it's not a personal best at the moment. We've got Guevara 13th, who might have expected of his form earlier in the weekend to be much higher than that. Huertas is a 10th and a half up halfway around. Vietti's a quarter of a second up. 3/4 of the way through his lap. The lap record is in further threat.
Yeah, we also have to add in Moreira and Manu Gonzalez, the championship leader, going really fast. As it stands, you can see Gonzalez there at the bottom of your screens. David Alonso jumps up another couple of positions into 12th.
And Kinnett is now out. He's 15th. Vietti at 34. 6.50. Another all-time lap record for the Boscoscuro. Gonzalez into second place. He's a 10th of a second adrift. Vietti, Gonzalez, Holgado, your top 3. Dixon, Moreira, Arenas. Your 4, 5, 6. But boy, are these crucial moments for Aaron Kinnett. He's about to start his final lap of the session. And if he doesn't improve on it, he's heading for qualifying one.
Brilliant session so far for Celestino Vietti. He has absolutely pulverized the previous lap record by 0.3 of a second to get it down to a 134.6. And Vietti doing some impressive work. What about Jake Dixon here? You can see he was getting just a bit of a helping hand from Philip Salat. He was trying to aid his slipstream as he came down in towards Carboni.
Making himself as big as possible down that short squirt from turns 10 to 11 to give Dixon the hole to ride through. Although it's something led to a personal best, but he's lost a chunk of time relative to Vietti through that third sector. Will follow Munoz over the line. Is he going to move himself into Q2? No, he's not, but it is his best lap of the day. It's 17th place for him.
Yeah, and it's going to be 15th place for Aaron Kinnett at best, because Kinnett has rolled off on his final flying lap, which means that he will be going through to Q1 tomorrow. So a relative disaster for the championship contender.
And it's second in the World Championship. Has been in qualifying one on 2 previous occasions this season already. Of course, he went from Q1 to pole position back at the British Grand Prix, so don't write Kinnett off just yet. And certainly wouldn't want to be in that kind of position on purpose if you've got a slightly sore neck after his crash last weekend. Vietti then completes his session another lap in the 134s. He's done at least 3 or 4 of those in the final 10 minutes of this session. Arbolino's session is concluded. It looked as if his fate was sealed from the very start of the session, didn't it? But that early mechanical problem, Arbolino ends the day in 19th spot.
St. Aegis is another rider that's maybe having 1 or 2 small issues in that final sector. You can see super strong in sectors 1 and 2 on his final run. I think he has something to say to Albert Arenas. I'm not sure if he's being somewhat sarcastic there with the thumbs up to the Catalan rider. Whether he actually benefited from a bit of the tow. I think it's probably the former option if I have to be truthful with this.
Albert Arenas does end the day in 6th place, Aegis 9th, so at least they are both through to qualifying 2. The big casualties on this opening day then. Kinnett 15. I guess you could include Munoz in 17th place, although perhaps with not the same track knowledge and experience that he had in Barcelona. Marcos Ramirez, who's 11th in the World Championship, he's outside the top 14 as well. Both of the American racing riders, actually, they're regulars. Ramirez and Roberts, 20th and 21st. And of course, Colin Via, too, front row starter a week ago. Always playing catch-up after that crash earlier on today. Via ends the day in 26th place, but it's another intriguing Grand Prix weekend lying ahead of us. And in a season where we've had 15 different riders on the podium and 9 different winners, Celestino Vietti potentially raising his hand today, saying he wants to be number 10.
Yeah, every indication from his performance this afternoon, just how consistent he was able to be on 14, 15 laps into his session, really indicate that he is probably best placed to launch a bit of a victory fight, even if it is only on Friday. Another good day at the office for Danny Holgado. Really has found himself at the front of Moto2 since we came back from the summer break. Winner last time out, and another really strong day. 3rd place for the number 27. David Alonso, who just about snuck into the top 14 in 13th. Holgado will be very, very content with his day's work.
Just to show once again now how close Moto2 is. 3rd and 13th for the IO duo, the Aspar duo, should I say. 3/10 between them. 10 places is what that amounts to. And for Aaron Kinnett, who I say only ended the day 6/10 off the pace. That's the kind of margin that you have to make sure you're within in Moto2. 15th for the 44. That did not improve at all in the latter stage of the session when he went for new tyres. His best lap time coming very early on in the afternoon. But it is Celestino Vietti who lays down a Friday marker at Misano. A new all-time lap record of a 134.6 with Bosco-Scoros 1st and 4th, Gonzalez and Holgado between Vietti and 4th place Jake Dixon, who recovered from that crash to make Q2. Diogo Moreira, fifth through Albert Arenas, Zonta van den Goldberg and Ismael Guevara, Aegis, Baltas, Lopez, Salach, Alonso and Huertas are the other riders that are automatically into Q2, which means that Aaron Kinnett, 2nd in the World Championship, is not. He is the big casualty on this opening day at Misano. Crashes in that session for the likes of Wildcard Alberto Ferrandez, an early mechanical for Tony Arbolino. That leaves both of those outside the top 14. A busy Q1 coming up tomorrow afternoon. Oh boy, was that a dramatic and interesting and intriguing Moto2 weekend ahead of us, with Celestino Vietti heading into Super Saturday tomorrow as the rider to beat. MotoGP practice coming up next with a Hall of Famer joining us in the commentary box. Stay with us. With a four-race flyway tour of Asia and Australia looming, MotoGP is back in Misano for round 16 in 2025. Located in Italy's Emilia-Romagna region, the nearby coastline is one of Europe's most popular for domestic and international tourists, and it's an area that's produced some MotoGP's biggest stars, including the one and only Valentino Rossi. Practiced his next live. It's time for MotoGP. 4.226 kilometres, 2.626 miles. That's the Misano World Circuit Marco Simoncelli. First Grand Prix in this part of the world all the way back in 1980. That was a 40-lap affair. And what was then a 3.448 kilometre circuit. Track won by American legend Kenny Roberts. Speaking of American legends, we're joined by one very, very shortly for this hour-long practice session. Sector 3 here in Misano includes one of the most breathtaking corners on the Grand Prix calendar, the 6-gear turn 11, Cavone corner. Gotta be careful going through there. Hard braking points, then gonna be taking up spots into turn 1, 8, 9, and turn 10. Good afternoon and a very warm welcome back to what is a very warm Italian Adriatic coast. Don't be fooled by some of those clouds that are looming overhead here in this part of northern Italy, because it is hot, 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 and the temperature rising as well as we prepare for a crucial 60-minute practice session here in round 16 of the 2025 MotoGP World Championship. Ducati's home Grand Prix, of course. Coming fresh off the back of them retaining and winning once again the Constructor World Championship. Well set once again this year to win the Triple Crown. Marc Marquez after a sprint victory in Barcelona last weekend, and his second place behind brother Alex in the Grand Prix of Catalonia. That means he does have to wait until next time, our next Grand Prix at the Mobility Resort Motegi, before he can be crowned our world champion this year. So many fans making their annual pilgrimage to this Misano World Circuit. Marco Simoncelli, well, Marc Marquez already has 5 wins in the MotoGP World Championship. It was one of their own, though, Italian Frankie Morbidelli for Pertamina Enduro VR46 Racing that led the way this morning on what was a typically eventful affair. As far as Morbidelli is concerned, he had to sit out the first 10 minutes suspended from the opening exchange of FP1 this morning after he disobeyed some marshal's orders after crashing out of the Grand Prix in Barcelona last weekend. Well, once he was out on circuit, Frankie was super fast, a 1:31.342, put him top of the standings. But of course it was Frankie, so there was more late drama. He crashed after setting that best time at turn 10. Also inside the top 10 this morning were the two Fabios, Quattararo and the Gian Antonio. Brothers Alex and Mark, 4th and 5th respectively, with Luca Marini shining on home turf once again. He was leading the Honda Challenge in 6th place, Pedro Acosta 7th, head of a trio of Aprilias, Marco Bezzecchi, Ralph Fernandez and Jorge Martin. Further down the order, a serial podium finisher here in Misano, Enea Bastianini on the Red Bull KTM Tech 3 machine, fresh off his first Sunday podium in orange last time out. Fabio Aldeguer, rookie, was 16th. Well, in this part of the world, in any part of the world really, when you talk about MotoGP, the Hall of Fame, a 7-time MotoGP World Champion, the icon, the superstar, Valentino Rossi, present to see
at what his boys can do over the course of the weekend. And it feels like the perfect time with Matt Burton Lewis still being the commentary box and Jack Appleyard down in pit lane to introduce another Hall of Famer, another MotoGP legend, another former MotoGP world champion. Great as always to be joined by the one and only Kevin Schwantz. Great to see you once again, Kev.
Great to be here, guys. Missoula is always one of my favorite places to come, even though it is the track we boycotted in 1989 and didn't race. But it's great to be here. The crowd's here in big numbers again, and that Hall of Fame presentation last night was really special.
I was going to say, first of all, before we carry on, we're watching Frankie Mordelli. This was late drama for him at turn 10 this morning after he'd just set the fastest time of day one. Congratulations into the Hall of Fame last night. It looked like a real special ceremony nearby Rimini. Valentino Rossi was there, Freddie Spencer was there, Casey Stoner was there. I'm sure that was a very, very proud moment for you.
It really was. What a bunch of great guys in the room. And you know what? We had dinner together, just us guys. And nobody wanted to swing at anybody. Nobody wanted to fight about anything. We just kind of caught up on old times and, had a really good time doing it. Lorenzo was there. Pedrosa was there. What an honor to be included in that list of names, that's for sure.
Yeah, the presenter wasn't too bad as well, was he?
You know, Jack was just a little bit slack on the night, but I told him I think the girl took the honors last night in the emceeing department, but Jack did a great job as always.
It looked like a fantastic night was had by Marc Marquez then, who was fifth fastest on the factory Ducati. As we said, he can't wrap up the MotoGP World Championship here this weekend. It's pretty much a foregone conclusion, but a pretty solid fifth this morning, wasn't it, Lewis?
Kept himself out of trouble, and that's, I guess, all we would have been looking for this morning. Did do the entire free practice one session on the same set of tyres and was setting very competitive lap times at the end of it, so Marc Marquez will have felt that was a satisfactory start to his weekend as Casey Stoner reacquaints himself with a Honda squad, and of course he won the second of those two World Championship in 2011, another of the all-time greats of MotoGP who can now call himself a Hall of Famer.
And reacquaints himself with somebody who did so much for his career. Alberto Puig, I think at one stage when the Stoner family first moved to Europe to try and chase the dream of winning the MotoGP World Championship, they had nowhere to live. I think they were bunked up in a caravan in Alberto Puig's back garden all the way back in the day. So I think Casey probably owes Alberto a couple of beers.
Amazing what our families will do for us to try and get us in the right spot, in the right place to capitalize on our goals as a kid. And man, World Championships. That guy's got a few himself, Giacomo Agostini. I was fortunate enough to sit close to him last night. He is a storytelling machine, and just what a great guy to be around.
Yeah, the ageless Giacomo Agostini. Well, of course, the Italian fans always love to see him here. Fabio Quartararo is certainly not lacking support at a racetrack where he was crowned world champion here back in 2021. Big news, of course, this morning for Yamaha, as for the very first time they put the new V4-powered YZR M1 out on track in a Grand Prix. Well, wasn't without its hiccups, Lewis. There was a bit of a small mechanical issue on Augusto Fernandez's number one bike, but finally, after all the talk, all the hype, the V4 is here.
Yeah, Augusto Fernandez racing it competitively for the first time. They have been testing that extensively throughout the season, and many expect Yamaha to go that route for next season. Augusto Fernandez, if you look at the stopwatch on its own, very competitive outing. 1.1 seconds off the pace for the V4, and I guess it was a decision ultimately, Kevin, that Yamaha had to make. They wanted to go with the other manufacturers in MotoGP. It did appear as if the inline four perhaps reached the ceiling of its competitiveness.
Yeah, it's always a tough call because you're so famous for those inline fours, and to completely swap technology and try and go with something different, it is a huge change. And to get it to this level, to be able to take it out on track the first time and see it be somewhat competitive in Fernandez's hands, I think is quite an accomplishment. I had lunch with Paulo Campanati just a little while ago, and he said the bike has started off in the right direction. Everybody loves it, loves the way it handles. Yeah, it's a little bit down on some of the top speeds, but we know how to work on that. So
Yeah, you can imagine at the moment Yamaha being fairly conservative in terms of how much power they feed that V4 reliability. Data gathering was the sort of buzzwords, weren't they, in the official Yamaha launch here in Misano next weekend. As Jack spoke to Mario Meregali, Monster Energy Yamaha team boss this morning, we are going to see the V4 raced in the final part of this campaign, most likely at Sepang and in the season finale at the Ricardo Tormo circuit in Valencia. So this is not a one-off appearance for that developing V4.
It kind of makes sense that they might try and race it next Grand Prix in Japan, because you could have a bunch of spare motors there. You could be doing, you could be doing a lot of testing with Augusto there. But I guess they have their reasons behind why they do and why they don't want to race it.
I think they said this morning they want to put it into a real high-stress situation, like, Malaysia, as you will well know, Kevin, from your racing days back at Shah Alam, how hot, how humid it was. It really is a tough test of the machine now there. So I think that's one of the reasons why they want to get the V4 assessed in Malaysia, and also, of course, the V4, they'll have a direct reference of the V4 the final round in Ricardo Tormo before Fabio and Alex Rins and Jack Miller and co jump on the new bike, I would imagine, on the Tuesday test.
Of course, it'll be tested extensively on Monday as well. Of course, the San Marino Grand Prix being followed by a Monday test here. Our colleague Kiko Giles is sticking around to bring you all of the news and views on Monday, so keep your eye on MotoGP social media channels and MotoGP.com on Monday for all the latest. And as we discussed this morning, the Yamaha V4 is going to be the central story, with Fabio Quartararo, Alex Rins, Jack Miller all getting their opportunity to ride that V4 on Monday.
Let's go down to Jack then for a pit lane update. Good afternoon, Jack. What's going on?
Yeah, good afternoon to everybody at home. Good afternoon to you guys in the box on this fine Friday afternoon. Just outside Honda, we mentioned this morning the new exhaust system. That's still on both of Joan Mir's bike. Quite interestingly, Luca Marini tried for the first time this new rear aero this morning, which is very, very much like what we see on the Aprilia, with the big sort of Stegosaurus style wings on the back, and then just in front or just behind where the rider's feet are, they have the downward face wings as well. He's opted to have that on both of his bikes for this afternoon, so having tried it for the first time this morning, he's clearly a big fan to have it now on both of his machines. We know from both Jorge Martin and Marco Bezzecchi just how much that revised rear aero helps that RSGP under braking in particular. They were calling out for some more stability when braking, so that was able to provide the RSGP with a little bit more, and clearly Luca felt exactly the same with the RC2 on 3B this morning as well. Honda once again throwing plenty of items, and the good news for them is whatever they're throwing at it at the moment is sticking on the bike. Everything that they're bringing is clearly seeming to work.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jack. In recent weeks, there's been new swing arms, new chassis, a new aero, and now we can see clearly on those pictures of Marini going around this Misano circuit, the Stegosaurus wing now fitted to his rear seat unit. Well, since we last caught up with you, Kev, which was all the way back at round 3 in Austin, over in Texas, Marc Marquez had opened 2025, winning the first 2 sprints and the first 2 Grand Prix. We got a sense straight away of how strong he was going to be on the factory Ducati this year. But since Austin, he's done nothing but winning for fun. From a distance, what have you made of just the utter brilliance of the 93?
Yeah, he's kind of made it look easy. It was interesting seeing the beginning of the season. He was making a few mistakes when he would be pressured in his first couple laps. Maybe not get that perfect start, but he's kind of got accustomed to not getting the greatest of starts, and having to work his way through 2 or 3 guys and put his head down for a couple laps and check out. Or if he does get a good start, it's just a disappearing act. So I don't know why we thought Mark might get off a Honda and get on a Ducati, get comfortable, and not get back to that dominant self. But a lot of it was coming back from that injury that he's had, and nobody knew exactly where Mark's new 100% might be. Maybe it was only going to be 98 or 97% of the old Mark. Unfortunately, I think he's back as fit, and maybe even 101, 102% Mark now.
24 wins out of 30 so far this season. We've still got 7 rounds remaining. Have you been surprised how easy it has made it look? Have you been surprised at how dominant he has been?
I've normally watched the Saturday race and don't need to watch the Sunday race. So, I mean, yes, absolutely. The ease in which he seems to be doing it, to me, it is amazing. And listening to how explicit the detail is about whenever there's left-handers, he just kills everybody by a tenth of a second in every left-hander that there is. It's like, come on, guys, let's work on our left. But yeah, I mean, I got no idea how he's doing it, and obviously, the best in the world can't figure it out either. So, congrats to Mark.
Course, the great riders have so many different facets what makes them great, but of course we've seen a real disparity between Marc Marquez and the other riders in the GP25 this year. Pecco Bagnaia and Fabio Di Antonio had their problems. They both spoke of the GP25 not necessarily giving them the front confidence that they want. Is that one of the signs of a great rider, particularly the sign of how great Marc Marquez is, that whatever bike you give him, he's able to just take it and ride it and not put those problems in his head?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Backs up to the Honda. Everybody's like, well, he's winning on the Honda. Everybody should be good on it. No, you put the best guys in the world on him, and they were train wrecks on the Honda. And once Mark got hurt, nobody knew exactly what to do, what direction to go. And, you know, it's just a sign of somebody that can sense what's happening before it happens. You know, and that's the rider that's riding with a lot of confidence on a machine, and the crew that he's got tons of confidence with.
Of course, there's been two sides to the story inside the Red Garage this year. I mean, as good and as phenomenal as Mark has been, certainly over the last sort of 6 or 7 Grand Prix, and pretty much for the most of 2025 on the other side, Pecco Bagnaia has had a real struggle. I mean, you hear the words nightmare, disaster coming out of his mouth on a frequent basis. How hard do you think it is right now to be Pecco Bagnaia when you have no confidence in your package and then your teammate is just destroying everybody for fun?